Now then, you're welcome along to our Rugby Show on this Friday. We are but 6-7 days away from showtime in the Six Nations. As ever, I should say that our rugby coverage on Indo Sport is brought to you by Energia. They sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels, grassroots with the Energia AIL. They are official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. And they have their Energia Rugby for All initiative as well, which supports inclusion, welcoming everyone of all abilities to participate in the game. Energia.ie/rugby is where you can see their special home energy offers for rugby fans, and we're thrilled they're on board with us for the year ahead. And of course, they're very much part of our evening at the Ambassador Theatre on Wednesday. It has crept up suddenly. So Martin Johnson and Keith Wood on stage, Ruaidhri O'Connor, who's with us now, and Sinead Kassan will be there as well, previewing all things Six Nations. If you want to come along, still a few tickets left. Ticketmaster.ie and search for Indo Sport and you'll find us there. So we're at the Ambassador Theatre in Dublin 1 and we're looking forward to it. As you can see, Ruaidhri O'Connor is tanned, relaxed, open-shirted. Meanwhile, Storm Ewan has battered us. So once again, Ruaidhri O'Connor lands on his feet is the story here. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I don't know, is it guilt or how to feel about slipping out of the country yesterday on a very full plane to Farrell in Portugal to the Algarve to attend the couple of days of Ireland's camp, which they've done. It's kind of an annual tradition now. They come out before most windows and spend a bit of time here. Yeah, it's not exactly splitting the stones, but I'm not expecting any sympathy from any of our listeners given what they've been through last night. Those of them have enough power to listen to us.
Listen, you deserve it. It had only been days since you were in Rome. So I think, swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, it's been it's been a busy week. Yeah, Northampton, Rome, and Portugal in the space of 7 days, and all for very different things. And it's I think it's a reflection of where we are in the year. And it's funny, I did left wing on Tuesday from Rome, and even trying to talk about the Champions Cup, I almost felt like the flick had been switched, that we were already in Six Nations mode, having gone to the launch and being here, talking to a couple of, Paul O'Connell was up for media earlier on, Andrew Porter, James Ryan. They're very much in Ireland mode, and it's come on quite quickly, this England game. It's looming very, very large. And, Six Nations just, I think as well, Joe, from it just kind of, it's all consuming. It kind of, I know there's URC this weekend, but it just hogs so much of the limelight and so much of the focus, and it's such a big deal. And it's great. Every year it just, it delivers so much for us.
Yeah, it sure does. A few things to chat to you about. You mentioned URC, and really, I'm only mentioning it to double down on your point that it just feels like the most off-Broadway edition, match day 10 of the URC of the whole season almost, given it falls on the eve of the Six Nations. We have Dragons hosting Munster on Saturday evening, Glasgow Connacht is Sunday 3:30, Ulster have Zebre 5:30, also on Sunday. I suppose the reason maybe to mention it with the Six Nations in mind is that Saturday at 5, Leinster play Stormers, the significance being the returns of James Lowe and Dan Sheehan in particular. Lowe from a calf problem, Sheehan from that ACL in July against South Africa. They were named in the Six Nations squad, so not a total shock, but it just heightens the sense, I suppose, of Lowe and or Sheehan coming to a green jersey near you.
Well,
soon.
yeah, I mean, Lowe has been kind of, he hasn't played since November, and it's good to have him back. And generally, you find that the Irish players do tend to get fit once Ireland starts looming large. They do seem to time their runs. It's certainly, the way they're managed by the RFU and all that sort of stuff, they tend to get them back on deck for these windows. But it's different when it's a cruciate. And funny, I was going through the airport yesterday, and Connacht were flying, and I bumped into JJ Hanrahan in boots, and congratulated him getting back on the pitch after his ACL injury back in April. And he kind of said, yeah, it wasn't bad, but I'm no Dan Sheehan, because for Dan Sheehan to get back on the pitch, having done his cruciate in July, it's quite a feat. And to be potentially playing against England in the Six Nations game that quickly is pretty remarkable stuff as well. So he's, it was probably underplayed, his loss in November. Like, he is such an important player. It was funny, it was O'Gara after the Leinster La Rochelle game, when he was asked about Leinster's title credentials, when it was him who brought up Sheehan and said, look, they're going to have Dan Sheehan back on deck, and he's a world-class player, he's a game breaker. He really talked effusively about him, and I guess maybe he was so hit by those two tries that he got in the La Rochelle final a couple of years ago. But like, Ireland did miss him in November. They missed like Furlong as well. Ireland don't have that many world class players to go around. Ireland has a very good player base, but like someone of Sheehan's level, a truly top one or two hookers in the world, with unbelievable pace, a game breaker in his own right. To have him back, I think you got to have realistic expectations of him in that he's only playing his first game since July on Saturday. So we got to keep an eye on it and see how his form looks. But if they can try and get him back, whether it's for next week or later on in the tournament, it's such a big boost because it adds to their line out, it adds to their work around open play, their work in contact, their breakdown work. He's a phenomenon. So like what a story for him to get back on the pitch, just to play for Leinster against a very strong South African team, but with the idea that he's going to be involved. I mean, Ireland wouldn't have named him in the squad if they didn't think he could play a role. At the same time, they named 4 hookers, so I think they're fully aware that it might not go to plan, that cruise sheets are not necessarily linear, and obviously there can be hiccups. So, but it's great to have him back.
Yeah, well, we'll see how he goes on Saturday. For a moment, when you said you saw JJ Hanrahan in boots, I thought, why is he wearing boots at the airport? It didn't make sense. Couple
I
of
should have said
things.
a high street pharmaceutical chain. I
Yeah,
shouldn't have
others
given
are
them free
available.
ads. There's a few interesting tens floating around. Just had a quick word with Jack Carty, and Johnny Sexton was on my plane, so he's in Portugal, and he had the cap pulled down. He was trying to slip onto the plane unnoticed, but it's hard when you're 6'4" and one of the best Irish, rugby players in Irish rugby history. So he's here helping prepare the team for the Six Nations as well.
Is he 6'4"?
He's bigger than me anyway.
No, he's big. He's big. He's always surprisingly big when you see him. That's interesting because there is a vagueness in the extreme when they answer questions on the extent of Sexton's involvement. They certainly were not releasing press releases to say he's in Portugal too.
No, I mean, he didn't travel with the team. He came over later. I guess that's he does have a full time job, and he's fitting this in around it. But he's never been photographed. Sorry, since he retired and since he rejoined the setup, he's never been photographed at training. If you look at the match program, certainly in November, there was something like 36 members of staff underneath Andy Farrell's name, listing out the physios, masseuses, logistics staff, assistant coaches. He's not amongst them. He's not an official member of the party. Although if you ask the RFU what his title is, it's assistant coach, and he is playing a role with the tens. I think Caelan Doris leans on him a bit for leadership stuff, and I didn't see him out there today. They didn't train fully today. They did a kind of a walkthrough session. They had a big screen set up in the corner of the pitch in the campus down in Quinta del Lago where they train, and they were doing kind of video analysis and then going out on the pitch and kind of walking through what they were doing. And I'm sure Sexton's involved in that and kind of looking at, I know his role is more around the kicking game, and that's an increasingly big part of the game, also mentoring the tens, but I'm sure he's got some input into their phase play attack and all that stuff that was kind of clunky in November. So yeah, I don't think we'll ever, I don't know, I'm sure at some stage we'll get the full rundown of what his influence is, but right now it's still a little bit kind of cloak and dagger.
So Simon Easterby, to some extent, it was like a kind of real unveiling for him at the Coliseum and doing the media day in Rome. By the way, those photos, amazing. I mean, geez, what a location. That was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I like the Six Nations launch is a it's an annual for us, and for a long time it was in this place called the Hurlingham Club on the outskirts of London, like a very nice country club, and but it was the same thing every year near Heathrow, easy to get in and out of. Last year it was in the Guinness Storehouse, obviously Guinness are sponsors, so they wanted to bring it to Dublin. It was a bit of a disaster, no fault of anyone's, but the weather didn't play ball, and a couple of coaches didn't make it. Dublin's not as connected as Rome or London. Obviously, they decided this year to take it to Rome because it's the 25th anniversary of Italy joining the tournament. And I suppose if you do it every year in the Coliseum, it'll lose its impact. But it really gave it a high end feel in terms of an event. I think the players, all the interviews were better than they have been. They changed the format a little bit, not to get into the weeds too much, but the access and the way the players and the coaches talked, I thought was much better than it would be at normal launches. I think part of that was because they just come straight from the Coliseum, and they were genuinely, it felt a bit special and something that you want to be a part of rather than a tennis club on the edge of London. So it worked from a tournament promotion point of view. I think it captured the imagination. I think in terms of, certainly it was used a lot. The imagery was used. It looked amazing, and it gave the whole thing a bit of prestige that maybe it doesn't always have. So yeah, it was really, really well delivered, and it seemed to energize funny, I bumped into Easterby just before we started, and I said to him, kind of, like, this is what you've been avoiding all these years, and he was just like, God, no, I'm just trying to embrace it. This is really amazing. And he kind of looked around. It was the interviews were in a kind of a palazzo, with, frescoes on the roof, like big high ceiling rooms. It was really cool. So they really embraced it. Where sometimes, I guess Warren Gatland was attending, I think, his 17th Six Nations launch. So maybe it's a bit more of a chore for him. But for Easterby, there was definitely a sense of, this is different. It's an experience. He may never do it again. He goes back to being an assistant once Farrell returns from the line. So he was getting involved. And for Doris, it was his first one as well. And he's standing alongside DuPont and Atoje up on stage in the Coliseum. And yeah, there's a novelty value for him as well.
Yes, yeah. No, it beat the photos down the years at that old English club of the players on some kind of concrete stairs, and them all wearing their white runners with their jerseys, and
Yeah,
their
they were still
kit.
doing that. They haven't found a solution for
It's
like the
got to be a
grown men.
solution. So Easterby's moment in the sun. Then I wanted to ask you about him. It just struck me thinking this morning. So born in Yorkshire, has played 65 times for Ireland. I didn't realize he had quite that many caps. That was 65. God, wow. It's big Ireland career. 2 test appearances for the Lions in 05. He has been on the Irish coaching ticket for a decade now. So in a sense, for 25 years, Simon Easterby has been hiding in plain sight. He doesn't have the profile to match a career which is that big in terms of breadth and obviously, Team Ireland. And even it struck me, if you say to most people the famous 2000 game against Scotland, the 5 debutants, I think straight away people say, yeah, Horgan, Stringer and Raj with Mick Galway holding them in the anthem, John Hayes, of course. The fifth, who was the fifth? Who was the fifth? And of course, it's Simon Easterby. So never a figure of debate or great fascination, but interest levels in him have reached a peak here. So very curious for your thoughts on Easterby and Irish rugby.
Yeah, like, I think he's had a very significant contribution, and there's not many people who've contributed more over the last 2 decades, and certainly there's no one who's contributed more, but probably taken less acclaim for it than this man. It kind of for a long time. It suited him down to the ground. I didn't cover him much as a player, but I did. I would have played when he was playing, and I would have admired him. And I played in a similar enough position, albeit a much worse version of him. And I would have watched him closely, and he would have been someone that I thought was an excellent rugby player and a really high-end operator in his position, but kind of an unsung, hardworking. Like in an era of stars, he was never the star, but he was a very valued teammate by all those players, and there was a reason coaches kept picking him. A lot of times when there was more fashionable options, playing at home as well. Like he spent most of his career at the Scarlets, so he wasn't a Munster fan favorite or a Leinster fan favorite, an Ulster fan favorite. He had to kind of earn it. He wouldn't be allowed to play for Ireland now if under the current rules, but back then it was a little bit less strict about overseas players. And he went off and coached the Scarlets. Then his wife would have a higher profile than he does in many ways. He's married to Sarah Elgin Easterby, who's has been the TNT anchor and lead interviewer for years on a lot of the rugby covers that people would have watched. And it's fun. It's always been kind of funny to us that for someone whose wife works in the media, he's never had that much interest in it himself, and he's always kept a very low profile. Certainly under Joe Schmidt when he was an assistant coach, I think he'd admit himself he wasn't a very enthusiastic interviewee. He was very cautious of not stepping out of line or kind of not towing the party line. He give quite stock answers, and he's warmed up an awful lot under Andy Farrell. I think he feels that he's allowed to be himself a little bit more, and I guess he's done it a lot more now, and he's more experienced, and he's coming out of his shell to some degree. And I don't think we're ever going to get him on the front page of a magazine, given behind the scenes and bearing his soul, but I think he's a much more confident communicator. I think the stuff from Rome was probably fairly informative and instructive. He doesn't give the game away in terms of selection or anything like that, but I think he took every question on its merits and answered it well. And by the nature of the position he's in now, people probably still don't know his name, are going to be watching him pre and post match on Six Nations games and getting to know him a little bit more. And I think he's in a better place to kind of, as he said himself, embrace it and enjoy it in the next while before handing back the reins. So he's vastly experienced and very highly respected by the players, but he's not Andy Farrell, and that's probably the big unknown hanging over the team going into this Six Nations window.
Are we any? My suspicion is it's akin to Sexton's involvement, vague at best in terms of information. Have we any idea the extent to which Farrell will be in Easterby's ear or involved in decisions across this Six Nations?
Well, I think he's available if Easterby needs him, and I don't think I think they would have had a good long discussion about what changes might be made about the strategy going into the tournament. But he won't be there at training. He's not here, for example. He's not going to be in the Abbottstown during the window. I think you can take it as read. He won't be picking the team as such, but I'd say he has a good idea who's starting this weekend. I'm sure he knows who's 10, for example. I'm sure that sort of stuff, the groundwork was laid before Farrell went to Australia on a recce a couple of weeks ago, and provincial form will inform that, but I think a lot of it will have been kind of predetermined by November, and also kind of just the prior work the players have in the squad. He won't be, interestingly, going to opposition training camps. So not opposition training camps, but Warren Gatlin would have visited Carton House and gone to Ireland training, and then the next week he would have gone to Scotland training. He might have dropped into Wales for a couple of days and England as well when he was Lions coach. Whereas Farrell's decided not to do that. He will go to games and observe them in his capacity as Lions coach, but he's taken the option of talking to the coaches about the players rather than actually seeing them on the ground, and that may allow him more wiggle room when it comes to being in Easterby's ear a little bit, and kind of being a sounding board, and informing some of the decisions that are made. So I certainly don't think there's no wall gone up between them that they can't talk to each other for the next 8 weeks. He will be an influence.
Yeah.
But on match day, they can't. He's not going to be in the coaching box. Obviously, there's a lot that he can't do, even if no matter how much he wants to. And I think that there's also a sense that they need to let this coaching ticket breathe without him, and develop themselves so that they're stronger at the end of it all. So I don't know if they're 2 games down. If the first 2 games don't go well, I'd imagine he'll be heavily involved. Whereas if they're going well, he might leave them at it.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
We'll never know either. Like, even if
No.
he could be in Portugal for all I know, but I don't think he is. But I tell you, he'll be even more incognito than Sexton.
He was behind you on the flight the whole time, and you missed it.
He's a hard man to miss. Is the only thing. If you think Sexton's hard to miss,
Yeah.
Farrell's even harder.
Chatting to Rob Kearney the other day at the Virgin Media launch, he was saying when Gatlin turned up to Irish training as Lions coach, you want to see how the intensity changed. Like things went from training session to full on test match, as you can imagine. And his loss is incalculable, Farrell, I suppose, and we'll only find out in due course. Because I always remember, for instance, you being around the camp once, and I'm not sure in a way that they would have been aware of, but you just had to walk by a certain window where a certain presentation was going on, and to your surprise, like Farrell had them all in fits of giggles. Like, he's not just after the first test in South Africa, here's a video of your lack of physicality, and this must never happen again, and all hell is unleashed in the second test, which we would kind of expect for someone of Farrell's kind of stature and schooling. He's also just a presence who can lighten the mood when required. That's been a big aspect of his management. So I guess different people will have to step into the breach and do all of that. And it will be really interesting if we get glimpses of how that plays out.
Yeah, that was this time last year. I think it was maybe just ahead of the final training session before they played. Before they went home, before they traveled to Marseille, before they gave that great performance. And I probably didn't think a lot of it until I saw how well they played in Marseille, and I got kind of your mind takes back to how relaxed they were, and probably when they were talking to us, they weren't that relaxed. But then you hear just a little snippet of, and I didn't hear the detail of it. I just heard the guffaws coming out of the room, and I saw Conor Murray doing a podcast earlier this week, and he was talking about how the first thing that he said when asked what they'll miss about Farrell was how funny he is, and how he and I was at the 150th anniversary dinner the RFU put on during November, and he held the room unbelievably well. I'd never seen him in that setting in front of, I think it was 1,600 people in the room, and he just had everyone in his fingertips. It was really impressive. I can't remember what he said, but I remember how everyone felt, if you know what I mean. So yeah, there's a presence gone that will be hard to replace, whether it's from within the players who need to step up and fill the void. Like the coaching ticket, like they're all the experience. You've got a really strong personality in Paul O'Connell, who was chatting to us earlier today, but he's a much more I know Paul O'Connell has many facets to his personality, but he is essentially a more serious, intense kind of figure. And I think Farrell has that side to him, but he also has the ability to pull the plug on that as well and let some air out of the balloon. So they need to be able to have, it can't be all work all the time. I mean, the players are in the middle of a busy season, and I think Farrell knew how to just pull the cord a little bit and allow a little bit of air into the room. So that's the challenge here. It's, they know the game plan. They all know what the plan is. They know what Farrell wants them to do. I mean, they knew what they did. They knew it in November. They just weren't able to execute it. The difference, I guess, is that he sets the tone. That probably frisson of intensity that Rob was talking about with Gatland. I say him being around training as well, instantly, if he's watching you, you're probably instantly going to raise your performance levels. And the question is whether the players can get to that level without him being here. And we all think they should be professional enough to do it, but there is a magic to what some of these people can do. Farrell's being one of them. So it's going to be, as you say, it's the key thing that we're going to be watching out for this month.
Yeah. So that's the Easterby Farrell coaching ticket dynamic. Caelan Doris is captain also at the Coliseum, also in Rome. He said two things which caught the eye. One, from a personal point of view, he said that he feels he hasn't had his best performances across 5 games over the last few years in the Six Nations. It's a tournament he wants to almost put a mark on personally. If you saw his performance, I know you did, obviously, in La Rochelle a couple of weeks ago, I would say he's poised to do that. So keep an eye out for a big Doris tournament. But the other thing he said of note, maybe to give us an insight into where the players are, is there's a bit of a lingering frustration about the autumn, a feeling that we didn't reach our potential. So that kind of sets the tone, I think, for how those of us even outside of the camp are looking at the team. That the autumn just copper fastened a sense that things aren't quite clicking at the moment. And I suppose this Six Nations, Rory, is going to tell us whether that was just a bit of a blip or if things really are on the slide. What's your hunch?
I think leaving November, I was worried about that, and part of that was that it seemed like we were all more alarmed about it than they were. But the way Easterby and Doris talked about it on Monday, no one likes being gaslit about this stuff. And when you can see that they're not playing well, when they come out and tell you they're playing well, it really triggers people. It annoys them. But they come out, like, they're owning it now, and they've admitted that it wasn't at their level. And I think they lost, to some degree, this was natural. It was always going to happen after the 2023 World Cup. There was going to be a drop off in 2024. It just took way longer than we were expecting to get there. If they played the way they played in November in the Six Nations, I would have understood it a lot more. But Marseille was so good and such a continuation of what they were doing. It was a bit of a shock that they played so poorly. Probably in Twickenham, really, if you look at it on a whole. Then again, in the first test in South Africa, they obviously got back up to a huge level in Durban in the first half and then won that game. With such unlikely combination of match-winning players, and Caelan Blade and Kieran Frawley, which spoke to a depth, and Jamie Osborne, and you kind of felt good leaving the 2024 kind of season as a whole. And then you come into November and there's such hype about the New Zealand game, and he picked such a veteran bench in that game, and it just didn't deliver. The starting team didn't deliver. The bench weren't able to lift it. It all went to pot in that second half. Then you had the question marks over 10. Their phase attack was just nowhere near what it was during their glory period of 2022 and 2023, when they were the best team to watch in the world. And this was all, it's all explicable, and it's all understandable given how high they had to go for 2023. And now you just wonder, are they at the bottom of the dip, or have they hit the bottom of the dip, and are they about to just bounce straight back up? And where I would have confidence going into this window is the form of a lot of the players is very, very good, from Leinster in particular, but also the way Munster and even Ulster played in that last round of European games. Their fitness, their clean bill of health. Sheehan being back, Furlong. I know we missed the last game for Leinster, but we expect him to be available next weekend. They make a huge difference. We can't underestimate the loss that they were. And the November window did come very early in the season. There was only 6 provincial games before it. Most of the players would have played only 2 or 3 games. Some of them were really cold going into it. It was their first game of the season, essentially. And I do think that played into it. And when they made 21 errors against New Zealand, it was a worry when they made 28 in their last game against Australia, that was a real worry, and the lineout was poor. So there's a lot to fix, but there's very, very good, experienced international players. There's a good, strong coaching ticket, and there is a form line now that we can kind of believe in, I think, going into this game. And there's bodies falling down around the place in other camps as well, which would, I mean, obviously that can happen next week against England. They could lose 4 or 5, and we'd be in a very different situation. But right now, looking at it, they seem to be in a very good place. But the question is whether they can get back up to their performance levels of 2020.
Yeah. What's your stab then at the starting 15 Easterby's going to pick?
I don't have one at this stage. I'll give you kind of where I see the key battles. I thought Jamie Osborne was really putting heat on Hugo Keenan, but Keenan was very good in that Bath game and did a lot of the stuff that Ireland want him to do. But I do think Osborne has a role to play in this window. I think Lowe and Hansen are fairly nailed on the wings, even though Nash did well. If Lowe is fit, I think he hasn't done enough wrong. I know he hasn't played, but Osborne's a good option there. But I can see Lowe coming straight back in on the back of the Stormers game. Midfield, like even Farrell said during the November window that he doesn't have it. He doesn't see it as any sort of pecking order. I think they go in every window and they look at training and they go off that, because when you're going Aki or Henshaw, really,
Yeah, I buy that. I think that is the truth.
I think that one I completely believe in. So I think Prendergast is still ahead at 10, but Crowley has obviously narrowed that gap. But I don't think Sam Prendergast has done enough to lose the jersey over the last couple of weeks. Gibson Park's nailed on. Front row, it depends on whether they go with this Andrew Porter trick that Leinster have been trying, but I suspect they'll probably start him. So, I presume Sheehan won't come straight into the starting team. Probably Furlong and Callagher making up the front row. And then the back five of the scrum is interesting, whether they keep with Ty Byrne at 6, or I don't know if you break up the James Ryan, Joe McCarthy combination that's been going so well for Leinster and looks stronger now than it did in November, but can he leave Tygburn out of the team? I'm not sure he's a 6 anymore. I think that I just don't know if he's dynamic enough, but he's still brilliant. But I think there are other players in the squad who can do a very good job at 6. Jack Conan's one, Ryan Baird is another. Isachuku's an outside shot. I don't think he'll play. So that's up in the air for me. And then 7 and 8 is Van der Fleer and Doris. That's nailed on. So this, I'd say they're probably locked. They kind of have to lock in their team early so that they get the cohesion up at training. So if you're able to get a view on what's going on down on the campus, they know, but it certainly have no read on it just yet. And there's a couple of areas that are very, very competitive, probably more competitive than we've seen for a while with this Irish team. And the bench is equally so. They've got real options in a couple of different positions. So that kind of goes back to why I think they're in a really good place, because I'd say training's white hot. There's a lot of players believe that they should be starting, and some of them are going to end up being really disappointed. There's going to be some really, really good players left out of that 23.
Yeah. You mentioned bodies falling for other teams. So I guess to an extent, this rounds 1 and 2 within a week of each other will dictate the Six Nations for Ireland. England at home, followed by Scotland away. Scotland have lost Sione Pilotu at centre, which is a huge, huge blow for them, obviously. But they're still kind of threatening. I mean, they've won the last 4 Calcutta Cup matches against England in a row, for instance, and caused Ireland trouble at times without ever really looking like beating them. But they're away. Some people saying that's a tougher game than England at home. For England, first up, with Eddie Jones sitting in an ITV studio, by the way, which I suspect if I was Steve Borthwick, I would not be loving. They have injuries. Jamie George is out. Alex Mitchell, and no surprise to anybody who watched the Munster game against Northampton, is a doubt. And then Jack Van Portfleet, Alex Coles, and Alex Stombrand are all out as well. They're strange, England, Rory, in that. So they ambush Ireland at Twickenham last year, lest we forget, and that's a really big one for them. And then they go to New Zealand and perform incredibly in the summer, and then they lose narrowly to New Zealand again in the autumn. One mistake at death cost them against Australia. They lose by 9 to South Africa. That's kind of an acceptable-ish loss at the moment, and then they beat Japan. So I don't think they blew anyone away, but they probably did underline the fact that if you still want to have, to some extent or other, that big 4 of New Zealand and Ireland and South Africa, of course, and the French and the pecking order there up for debate, they kind of showed they're coming back to that neck of the woods, I think, although still this overriding sense is that Borthwick hasn't convinced.
Yeah, he's an interesting figure, Steve Borthwick. I mean, they did get to that semi final through the weaker point of the draw, or weaker side of the draw at the World Cup. But they came as close as anyone to beating South Africa in that game. They came with a really clearly defined plan. The players bought into it, and it's so nearly worked.
And the weather suited them.
It did, but that's the game. You got to play it, and it was, and South Africa were wrecked after beating France the week previously. All that being part of it, they were still minutes away
Yeah.
from a World Cup final, and I wouldn't necessarily have written them off against New Zealand in a final either, because England will always have the players and will always have the strengths to be in a game. You can, even when Ireland, Croke Park aside, maybe the 2018 Grand Slam aside, like Ireland have had the upper hand in this fixture for a lot of the last kind of 10, 15 years, but a lot of the time it's been one score games.
Mm.
Even poor England teams have always been really competitive. And I think if you think of the 2019 ambush or last year, they're probably the two occasions where the entirety of Irish rugby sailed into those games, thinking it was only going one way, only to be surprised by what was delivered by in both times England teams that had been struggling. So they have the capacity to turn it around because they have some excellent players. And I think making Itoje captain is a response to the fact that they had Jamie George as captain, and he was very good at a lot of things. But because he's a hooker in his mid-30s, he wasn't on the pitch for the last 25, 30 minutes of the game. And Itoje was often the person charged to lead them home, but they felt that taking off your key, your captain should be your key player, you're taking him off, that it led them to be a bit aimless in that last 15, 20 minutes of games. So the idea being that Itoje never comes off and he'll be consistent through the games. But it's a challenge for him. He's never really been seen as a captain by his coaches, even though from the outside he looks every inch a captain and a leader, and he has presence and he's an intelligent man. But that's a challenge for him to kind of put his stamp on things in the next couple of months. But I certainly see him as a hugely dangerous opponent for
Mm.
Ireland. Borthwick is massively playing up the idea that Ireland are some sort of superpower and England are a plucky underdog, and they're going over with far fewer caps and far less experience, and they're trying to play a new game. And I was going to say he's very good at doing that, but I find it a bit churlish for the coach of the richest rugby nation in the world to describe a smaller rival as in the way he describes Ireland. And Ireland, yes, do get great stuff out of their system and have great cohesion, but England should always be a team aiming to win this tournament. And if they get the win and they're capable of it, then suddenly they could go on a roll. They got France at home a week later, and what was a daunting fixture, you're then going in on the back of beating Ireland, and you've got confidence, and things could open up. But they've lost a lot of games, a lot of tight games in the
Mm.
last year that probably undermines faith. I think the Felix Jones departure is just damaging to the perception of that coaching ticket. Even Alan Walters leaving them for Ireland as well, even though that was probably more simplistic in terms of his wife is Irish and he wanted to move over, and there was a Lions element to that as well. He's going to be the Lions fitness coach. So, but Felix Jones walking out that early in that ticket, I think, just undermines faith. The way that win last year was so rooted in that defensive line that they had, and the trouble they caused Ireland. Um, but they're still capable of great. Like they took Ireland. I thought they took Ireland's strengths last year and turned them into weaknesses, which is a real skill from a planning point of view. And any coaching team that can do that is capable of doing it again. Maybe Ireland will be more eyes wide open going into this one, but it's a dangerous game.
Yeah. Wales France is opening night. Wales off the back of 12 defeats in a row, which is scarcely believable, really. Gatland, I saw in Italy at the launch, was citing some experience returning in the guys of Falatau and Josh Adams and Liam Williams and David Jenkins. So maybe just a touch more know-how there, but it's hard to see them being a big factor in the tournament. Of the French, if you're assuming, and it's a big assumption, I appreciate, if you're assuming Ireland can navigate England and once again get over Scotland, then there's the feel of a Grand Slam playoff about round 4. Dupont is back. That's worth I don't know how many points per game. And I saw a quote from Galtier, kind of slight parallel with Ireland. He said, rugby's the most popular sport in France, more so than football. By that I mean rugby's the 10th biggest sport in France in respective number of registered players, but we're the most watched sport on television. He said, we find that very stimulating and very pleasant. Those two adjectives have a stench of Google Translate, but you take the point. It's far better than a year ago. We're still all devastated. We'll never get over this. So I'm expecting a very different France this time around. I think most people are marginal favourites for the tournament.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although Dublin, that round four game being in Dublin is a big win for Ireland in terms of, like, the schedule lines up nicely for Ireland if they can get that bit of a roll on. I think it all. I mean, it's the one phrase that kept cropping up at the launch and always does. Six Nations is all about momentum, and sometimes cliches are true, and it is. Like, you do need to get on a bit of a roll, but it'll be set up lovely for that round four game if they both can sail through unscathed. Twickenham will be. I don't think they'll win by 50 points in Twickenham like they did last time 2 years ago. But much like Ireland, their teams in Europe are largely playing very, very well. They pick heavily from Toulouse and Bordeaux, which are the two teams that have lit up the Champions Cup pool stages. They also have a nice smattering from La Rochelle, and as much as Doris was exceptional in that La Rochelle game, Aldry went toe to toe with him and traded blows. And I think the new rules around the number 8, where there's a lot more space at the back of a scrum, really suit him and Doris, and both of those players can have a big influence in this Six Nations window. They all the stuff that used to hold them back in terms of the clubs being using players mid Six Nations, that's all gone. They're completely bought in and into France, and Galtier does seem to be able to generate a good bit of unity. And Dupont is such a galvanizing figure. Like, I didn't appreciate how much they'd miss him until he was gone last year. Marseille, Luku. I know Nolan and the Garrick subsequently came into the team and they look much better, but like, Luku struggled so badly in Marseille. Dupont will add so much to them, and he's playing very, very well. He was the main draw at the launch on Monday. Or on Tuesday. He was the star and the main character of the whole event. Everywhere he went, people were drawn to him. So he wears that well. He doesn't seem to knock much out of him. So they're very well placed. But to go to London and Dublin is a very, very tough draw. A slam might be beyond them, but a championship is there for them.
Couple of quick things before we wrap this up. The laws are always changing. So included in the latest dispatch, the 20-minute red cards will be in place for this year's men's, women's, and 26 nations. How do you feel that's all bedded in? Are you thumbs up or thumbs down on those?
I'm pretty naturally very negative on it, but open-minded. So trying to be open-minded. I haven't seen enough really evidence either way as to whether it's a good or a bad thing. I certainly think 2 yellows shouldn't equal a red anymore based on what we saw in Bath Leinster a couple of weeks ago. I think that's an archaic way of looking at things when you've got 10-minute yellows and 20-minute reds, and I just think that was too much of a punishment. But I'm open-minded. I'm not going to come down on it either way just yet because the sample size is still relatively small, and I think it's kind of like, what shade of red are you looking at? If it's someone accidentally going a little bit too high and the ref apologetically sending him off, then I'm kind of okay with that. If someone stamps on someone's head, well, there's no way I think a 20-minute red card is merited. Now, those kind of offences are fewer and far between these days. Most of the red cards we've seen are for headshots, really, or taking a player in the air. So and a few around the ruck now with the kind of collapsing your weight on an opponent's leg. I can see the merit, and I do think, I know there's been a few games where it's 14 or 15 and they've been decent games, but I do think reds, especially early reds, do tend to damage fixtures, and I think it's almost too much of a team punishment for an individual crime. But at the same time, if it lessens the kind of incentive, or the if it makes red card less of a punishment for players and they start doing things they shouldn't be doing, then I'm not in favour of. But I haven't seen that in the 20-minute red cards games I've seen. I think it's kind of been the same game. It hasn't really had a material impact.
Yeah, I don't think they've said, whoa, deterrent's gone, let's go nuts. I don't think that has happened. Players are selfish. They don't want to leave the pitch.
It's a massive individual price to pay, even if a sub can come on, fair enough, but it's not
that's no
I do
consolation.
think, like, Sam Cane, like, the red card Sam Cane got in the World Cup final is probably the biggest example of a red card. It would have still been a massive ignominy for him to have to stay off the pitch, but it probably would have been a better contest. And for the type of infringement it was by Kane, it probably would have been fair enough if they'd been able to bring someone on from after 20 minutes, and might have meant Siak Lees would have been sent off as well, which probably he deserved in that game as well. So look, the game isn't perfect. That's why they keep changing it. And it's kind of what annoys me more is the kind of fact that it's all haphazard and kind of, you know, four law changes here and four law changes there. I know you'd be
Mm,
talking about the GA changes this week, but like that makes way more sense to bring in a suite of a massive amount of changes at once and just fix the game. Whereas rugby just seems to be tinkering on the edges all the time.
yeah. Two quick things then to finish. Uh, Dave Nucifora, I can't quit you, says Andy Farrell. So he's obviously moved on to Scotland now, David Nucifora, having been at the helm of Irish rugby for a decade plus. And so Farrell's brought him into his backroom setup for the Lions. We don't know precisely what he'll be doing, but he's kind of general team manager, that kind of a role, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, before he was a performance director, David Nucifora was a very good coach. He coached the Auckland Blues. He coached the Brumbies before moving into a more performance administrative role where you kind of put the furniture in place to try and bring about high performance. And he's very good at that. You know, he is his record with Ireland was excellent. He wasn't particularly popular, but that was partly part of the job. And he one thing he does know, and he knows very, very well, is Joe Schmidt. He had
True.
Joe Schmidt as his assistant coach in the Auckland Blues. Joe got the Ireland job, and Nucifora followed over to the RFU quite soon afterwards, and they worked hand in glove for the best part of a decade before Joe moved on and Farrell was brought in. And Farrell, I don't think it got much traction at the time because there was so much else going on. But Farrell was asked, I think, in the aftermath of the World Cup quarter final, what were the biggest things that got them to the point where they could perform so well at World Cup, and he talked effusively about David Nucifora and the role that he played. And I think they had they had a very good working relationship, the RFU, and kind of decided that they needed a change of voice after last year's World Cup, and said thanks and good luck to Nucifora. He obviously moved to Scotland. Humphreys is in now, but that relationship between Farrell and Nucifora has held, and
Mm,
obviously he's still part of one of the unions. So it's almost there's a bit of a like only Gregor Townsend is going this time. So there's also you're saying to the Scots, well, we've got one of your people in as well, but he knows Australian rugby. You know, former Wallaby. He spends 1 month a year in Australia. He was on the recce with Farrell last month. He knows the territory really well, but he also knows Schmidt. It's a
yeah.
smart hire,
Both. Yeah.
and I think this four will enjoy it.
Yeah. One other final piece of news out of the Six Nations launch in Rome. Netflix have looked at seasons 1 and 2 of Full Contact. We haven't seen season 2 yet. Have you seen it? You haven't got
But
an early dispatch?
I was at the premiere on Monday of the first episode.
Okay. So they have decided to cancel. The Six Nations Rugby CEO, Tom Harrison, confirmed as much in Rome. This one of many, they call it sports adjacent documentaries that Netflix have trialed. Obviously, Drive to Survive being the goose that laid the golden egg, and they've tried it with the whole range of sports, full swing, quarterback and receiver in the NFL. And there were high hopes for Full Contact. I found season 1, having not seen season 2, very meh, quite dull, quite hard work. Um, it was fairly evident Ireland didn't exactly open their doors Lions 1997 style, which is kind of on the mind at the moment, given our live show next week. So uh, you can interpret this as threefold. One, probably primarily from Netflix's point of view, because they don't really care about quality. It just didn't perform in the ratings. So that's probably the primary reason. It was never in the top 10 very often. Um, Secondly, the quality, and connected to that, the cooperation or lack thereof. And so, what's the point in continuing with this niche sport if they're not even going to give us huge access? There's no coincidence that really in season 1, Italy were the most cooperative, and the higher up you went the food chain, the less access that you got. So, great idea in theory, just what rugby needs, and rugby shoots itself in the foot again when it comes to promotion.
Yeah, I do think there's a bigger picture view on it as well, being taken by Netflix rather than like Netflix. I think after the Katie Taylor fight and the Mike Tyson fight, have kind of gone, hang on a second, why are we not in live sport?
It's true, and
And live sport.
WWE has come on board, and so that they're moving in that direction. But I if it was
No,
working, it'd
sorry.
be
Your
working.
point is your point on the documentary is complete, like is valid, but I do think that Netflix have realized that these documentaries they take a lot of effort
Mm,
and probably a lot of money,
mm,
and if they spend that money on live rights, they'll get a lot more numbers. Like the Netflix series, I'm told did quite well. Certainly in Ireland, it was number one in Ireland, not just for documentaries, but it was the number one show for a period.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I retract that then, 'cause I read a piece, and maybe it was more of an English, I can't remember where I read it, and it was saying the ratings weren't good, but maybe in Ireland they were.
Yeah, I think it was strong in Ireland, and but your point, like I think a lot, anecdotally, people I've talked to weren't that impressed by it. So I think a lot of people watched it, but because especially in Ireland, like Ireland won the first Six Nations Grand Slam the year it was being made, and they barely featured in it because, like it started over here in Portugal at the start of that Six Nations campaign. Like Ireland were very hostile to the cameras being there. It was very poorly planned. I think the deal was struck very late. It wasn't for a lot of money. There was very little agreement with the players about what was going to be involved, and um, then at the end of it, Andrew Porter featured heavily. He kind of was very open about his mental health struggles and the death of his mother as a teenager, and they spent an episode with him. But I think about 7 other players gave them the same amount of time and let them into their homes, and all ended up on the cutting room floor. So I know that's part of making a documentary and all that sort of stuff, but there was a bit of resentment as well about that.
Other Irish players?
Yeah, and that would have been the
Ah,
same in all the camps.
okay.
So maybe it wasn't 7, 8, but a number of players I think were left pretty annoyed that they'd given a lot of time and effort to this and didn't make the cut. Whereas, and Porter did, and like I think he was one of the few that came out, not the few, but he came out of it quite well. And his episode had a certain amount that was fairly compelling, even though I would have known his story to a degree. Part of the idea is that you're selling the story to people who don't watch the sport, and I don't know if it reached enough people like that either. I think a lot of people who know rugby watched it and were left a bit cold by it. I think people who watch Formula One, people who watch Full Contact, don't like it that much. But people like me who don't watch Formula One certainly watched the first couple of series and got really interested in it and found it compelling. But the way they string together narratives and they pick one bit from one part of the season and another part from another part of the season and put them together, that annoys participants. Like the opening episode of this series is fine. It's not bad. It focuses on Marcus Smith and England and ahead of their game against Italy. It's a bit brash. He comes. I don't think he comes out of it great personally, but that's part of it. That's interesting in itself. But Ireland again, like if you look at the headline or the names of all the episodes, Ireland don't feature very prominently for a team who actually went and won the tournament. And I think they did give a bit more access. If just watching the trailer, even there are clips of Andy Farrell speaking to the players, which I'd be interested to see. I know they follow Peter O'Mahony for a period of it, but I guess you only get out of what you put into it. But I think strategically, from Netflix point of view, definitely it is more, from what we're told anyway, it's more about the fact that they want to go after live rights. And I think Six Nations would quite like that, or certainly all the rugby unions would like the streamers to get involved in the bidding process for rights because TV is it's not as competitive as it once was, as we saw with the Champions Cup ending up on Premier when they wanted a big bun fight between all the broadcasters and it just didn't materialize. So rugby's in a weird place at the moment, and this is not a good, even if the reasons are not um even if the reasons are Netflix moving towards live sport, it's not a great look for them to lose interest 2 years in.
Yeah. Brilliant. I told you this would be a quick hit, and here we are, the guts of an hour later. So apologies. I've kept you from your nice fish supper there overlooking the Mediterranean, I'm sure.
Yeah, a bit of peri chicken maybe. We'll see. But I'm always happy to chat rugby.
Next time I talk to you, we'll be on a stage with Martin Johnson, Keith Wood, Sinead Kassan. So bring your rugby opinions. I want you. When you say something, when I ask you about England and you start talking, and that furrowed brow leans out of his chair and looks down at you, you better be able to back up what you're saying. Okay.
Who the F is that guy?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know your Easterby piece in the paper tomorrow, so I'm sure people will check that out as well.
Cheers, Joe.
All right, Ruaidhri O'Connor. Thank you.